Based in New York City, Teddy Cosmo has been releasing music since 2017. Originally working under the name the Sadsaps, Teddy Cosmo has been pushing the envelope of representation for disabled musicians since high school. Born with cerebral palsy, playing guitar didn't come easy for the musician. But after years of practice, Teddy has developed a unique playing style that works with the tremors in his hands. Inspired by artists like the Beatles, Nirvana, and so many others, Teddy Cosmo brings a classic indie rock sound to the table with a unique twist.
Thank you so much, Teddy Cosmo, for joining me here on AwareNow to share this space and to share your story. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's really a great opportunity, so I appreciate it a lot.
Absolutely. So let's begin this way. We all fall in love with different people, places, things at different times in our life. When it comes to the guitar, Teddy, when did you fall in love? And when did you start playing?
Yeah, so I would say I was probably about 12 or right around 12. I had heard the Beatles when I was doing one of my many listening sessions of music with my mom. We used to sit at the family computer, and she had this great library of music on iTunes because she used to, before I was born, she was a manager for a record store back in the 90s. And so she had all these CDs, and we got to Here Comes the Sun, one of my favorite Beatles songs. And I was like, who's that? And my mom was like, that's the Beatles. I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Do they have other songs? And she was like, yeah, they're probably the most famous band in the world. And so then we went and listened to a bunch of other Beatles music, and I was like, oh, okay, I want to do that. I want to be them. I want to play guitar. I want to make music. This is the coolest thing ever. So I begged and begged and begged to get a guitar. And my parents were like, all right, well, if you save up birthday and Christmas money and everything, then you can get one. Now, we did not have a lot of money or anything like that, so I saved up everything I had, and I think I got maybe around $120 or something, and we went to Toys R Us, and I got a First Act guitar, a little blue electric guitar, and a really awful sounding amplifier that was also First Act, and so I had that for a while. And I used to, I didn't have lessons at that point. I think my parents were probably like, let's see how this goes. Let's see if he was really, into it. So I thought that you had to tune the guitar by making all the tuning pegs face the same way and all this silly stuff. But we had a family friend that played music in a band, and also did guitar lessons on the side. So I asked hey, can I please get lessons? And then eventually they were like, yeah, you can get some lessons. And then from there it was all I cared about. I finally found something to focus on and something to really sink my teeth into. And from that point on, it was just, okay, let's, I'm gonna make this my main thing now.
It's beautiful. So it began with the Beatles. So let's switch gears a bit. How has your journey as a musician with cerebral palsy, influenced your creative process and your approach to music making?
Yeah. So in a lot of ways. So with the, from a lyrical standpoint, I like to make references or little metaphors and things like that, little Easter eggs that I can hide in the lyrics that other disabled folks might pick up on, which is fun for me because then if I get a message or something from somebody that's oh, you said this and that's so cool, that's extra fun. It's also fun because it's then I get to put a little bit more of a piece of myself into the lyrics. but from a creative standpoint, like when actually making the music, there's definitely a lot of times that I'll have to work around different limitations. I work with my best friend and co-producer, Chris Wood, and whenever we're recording or like writing things and getting stuff situated in the studio, it's like, um, for example, like guitar playing, sometimes my hands won't cooperate or something like that. And we need to get a certain sound. But it's like, okay, how can we do this if my hands don't want to function the way that I need them to in this particular minute? Like, how can we still get what we're looking for? So there's definitely a lot of like playing style and things like that that just sort of lead into or are pulled from the disabled aspect for sure.
So speaking about, specific songs of yours, California Letdown, I did have to ask you just quickly about this particular song. There's a particular line, and so speaking to folks with disabilities, I have MS, the line, whatever it is, it's working enough to convince us we're something we're not. That line, I was like, I felt that weight and that depth. Would you mind, before we continue on with these other questions, speak about that line, about that song? I'm just so curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one has like sort of a double meaning to it. Like the overarching story of California Letdown is about like a toxic relationship, basically. It's sort of like the couple in question is on the rocks, and it's about like a car trip on the way back from like a vacation or something where everything's tense and they're just like, this is the end of the road, and and so the whatever it is, it's working enough line is the one meaning is, okay, they're just convincing themselves that they're gonna like work it out, but it's all a farce. The other side of it is sort of the disabled aspect again, where it's kind of a reference to, for many, many years before I released music under the name Teddy Cosmo, I very much tried to distance my disability from my music completely, because I was incredibly concerned, and this is silly looking back on it now, but I was very concerned about, okay, well, I want people to listen to my music and like it because it's good, and not out of like, pity or like, this guy's disabled and that's great, and so I'm going to listen to his music. So I would try to keep it from my music, and it's just a reference of like, that's kind of, again, me sort of kidding myself and pretending that like it's not a big element of who I am and what I do.
Yeah. Well, I totally hear that. Really powerful song. It's how I found you, actually, was through that song. So,
oh, cool.
Could you share some insights into how you developed your distinctive guitar playing style, like, considering the challenges posed by your condition? Are there like specific techniques or adaptations that you found particularly effective for you?
Oh, yeah. So I have cerebral palsy, and with that, for a lot of folks with cerebral palsy, there's hand tremors in addition to the just general spasticity. So I have a lot of spasticity in my hands, which can be sort of limiting, but then they also shake a lot, which is kind of a weird combo. So I very quickly, like when I was first learning guitar, figured out, okay, there's some things that my body's gonna fight against, like for example, like holding a pick. And so it's like, all right, well, this is too hard to do, not because like I don't want to do it, or not because I think that I shouldn't do it, but because my hands would just, they wouldn't grip it the right way. So I was like, okay, well, I gotta play with like fingerstyle, and I looked it up at the time, and I was like, okay, well, a bunch of my favorite guitar players didn't use picks either. Like Hendrix didn't use a pick, and at the time I was very, very into John Mayer, and he doesn't use a pick. So I was like, that's fine. But then I realized with the shaking that that's gonna be, I can't play fingerstyle the way most people play fingerstyle either. So what it sort of caused is a very heavy-handed playing style that is fingerstyle, but it also uses my entire hand. So like if you see like a video of me playing and look at my right hand, it's my hand is kind of going all over the place rather than like a very like hyper specific and centralized finger picking style. It's like all over the place. So it causes, I think, maybe me to like hit the strings a little harder, and just in more of a quicker fashion. As far as my left hand chord shapes, I have a pretty good handle on now. Now that took like 3 years. Like the first 3 years I was playing guitar, I could barely like do chord shapes and like chord transitions and stuff like that. But I over time learned like with bar chords, using my thumb is more effective than trying to get my index finger to straighten out all the way, because it doesn't want to do that. So I wrap my thumb around the neck of the guitar to get the root notes, which is another trick that I stole from like Jimi Hendrix. Used to do that all the time. And then like my pinky on my left hand does not like to work. So like when I'm playing lead guitar, I never use my pinky. I only use my first 3 fingers there, or stuff like that. And I'm lucky to have very large hands, so I can kind of stretch them the way I need to and get around it. I know like if I had smaller hands, I would probably have a lot harder time, but so that it's just like little things like that, like figuring out what my body specifically is kind of letting me know that I have to change.
Fascinating to me, and I love, I mean, at the end of the day, we rock what we've got, right? I mean, we just
exactly.
do what we can, in the fact that you understanding your body, saying, okay, if I can't do it this way, let's find a different way. So as a disabled musician, you've been advocating for representation, inclusion in the music industry. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced, and what changes would you like to see in the industry to better support artists with disabilities?
Yeah, it really all boils down to accessibility with the venues, and the venues goes for both musicians, but also like enjoyers of music, people going to live shows and things like that, because a lot of these venues in New York, or I was in Pittsburgh before I lived in New York, like they are not set up for disabled people to perform, especially from a smaller artist standpoint. Like if you're not playing giant venues, there's not gonna be, in most cases, a ramp to get on stage. So like a lot of times I've had to get out of my chair, climb up onto the stage, get somebody to lift my chair onto the stage, and then get it back in my chair and play the show. Or sometimes it doesn't even have like a wheelchair entrance, and I'll have to climb up or down stairs to get to the bar or wherever. And then sometimes they don't have bathrooms. So it's like, okay, well, if I know I'm going to the show, I have to go to the bathroom beforehand, hope that I can do everything in a timely fashion, and also make sure I don't drink any water, because if I do, then I'm gonna have to go to the bathroom and there's not a bathroom. So it's stuff like that is just really limiting. And then by not having these spaces for smaller artists to sort of come up and get their footing, if you're disabled and you're trying to like find your audience, a a lot of people find their audience from playing shows. That's like the main way you get an audience. But if you can't play shows because there's no accessible spaces for you to do it, then it is significantly harder to find an audience. And I'm fortunate to have as much mobility as I have. There are a lot of people that are disabled that have significantly less mobility than I do. So like getting out of their chair to climb onto the stage or climb upstairs isn't really an option. And it's I used to do it a lot more. And now I'm to the point where I'm like, I don't know if my body's just getting less or getting older or what. Like it's less able to bounce back from big strenuous things like that. So I'd say accessibility is the main thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you say not only for the artist who's performing, but for the audience as well. Like we really have to be more aware about how we're designing these spaces, how we're opening these spaces to be universal design, right, for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of wheelchair seating from an audience perspective is just like, I've experienced it where it's like in smaller venues or medium-sized venues, it's like where all the bands put their gear for some reason. So like the whole back line, or like the stuff that's not being used, the instruments and all that stuff, it's all shoved in the same spot, and then you're like crunched in with all this equipment, and that's not comfortable. But also then the bands like are going back and forth to get their things, and you feel in the way, but it's the only place for you to sit. So it's just a lot of work needs to be done there for sure.
For sure, accessibility all around. So your musical influences range, and we spoke about the Beatles, and then all the way to contemporary ones like Nirvana, so many. How have these different outside influences shaped your sound, and how do you incorporate them into your own unique style as Teddy Cosmo?
Yeah, so that is, I always say that, like, whenever I get asked a question like this, it's always one of the really hard ones. But what I would say is that I try to make music that I like to listen to. Like, my goal is ultimately to make music that if I didn't write it and I heard it on Spotify or like someone played it for me, I'd be like, oh, awesome, I love this, and then listen to it. So that's kind of where I'll draw the inspiration from those different influences. Like if I like a certain band, like for example, I'm a big fan of like Elliott Smith, or a big fan of like Manchester Orchestra. And if I'm in a period of my life where I'm listening to a lot of like a particular band or a particular genre or sound, I'll try and make it sort of in that vein as much as I can, so that I like it after it's done. If that makes sense.
Perfect sense. Yeah, why make something that you don't like? So for I guess one more question for you today would be this: for artists who question their ability because they have a disability, what advice do you have?
Yeah, that is, I would say that's one of the most important questions that can be asked in any sense for any disabled creative that has a chance to speak on it. So the most important advice is to just keep going, and don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't do something that you want to do. Because even if there are hurdles in your way or like things that you're going to have to adapt to, that's no different than any other experience that disabled people have in their everyday life. So why should it like keep us from creating or making music if that's the avenue you want to go down? Like, just keep doing it, because eventually you're going to figure out what works for you and the ways that you're able to do it, and it's super rewarding once you get there. And also, additionally, I think like we're all sort of working towards the same thing. Like any disabled person that is doing something creative, that where the like goal is, okay, I want this to be like breakthrough. We're all trying to chip away at like the glass ceiling of what society has kind of put in place of, oh, you can't do this because you're disabled, or you're not going to be as good as the able-bodied person in the same room. But the thing with disability is we have to work so much harder just to even get in the room in the first place. So even if 10 people listen to your stuff, or one person listens to your stuff, if you're a musician, it's still putting work in that's going to make it easier and better for future disabled people in your spot. And like, just to share like a little piece of info too, like, I don't know, I mean, it must have been maybe from California Letdown or something like that, but like, I've been releasing music since I was since I guess professionally, in quotations, since 2017. But even before then, and this is the first time I've really had any attention on it. And I think I mean, it's like 5 albums and a bunch of EPs and all this stuff. And it's like, so that's why I say don't stop and like just keep going, because eventually it's gonna make some sort of a splash, even if it's the smallest splash to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Just keep going. Great advice. Great music. Thank you so much for sharing this time, for sharing your story, for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And I mean, I'm just happy to be able to speak on it for a little bit. It's, you know, all this has been really awesome, and it's cool to be asked questions from people that are going to ask like questions that matter, as opposed to a lot of times when I've experienced when able-bodied people, or like people just generally sometimes that aren't like in the community in some sense, will ask me questions that'll be very hyper fixated on like this how hard is it, you know, but like not in a way that actually helps people with advice or anything like that. It's just very hyper fixated on like the disability as a spectacle rather than like the actual important stuff behind it. So I just really appreciate the genuine and good questions.
Well, I'm just honored to be able to ask them to you. And, you know, it's because that situation, it's not that you are a disabled musician, you are a musician that happens to have a disability, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
It doesn't, your diagnosis does not define you. And it's certainly a part of you, but not all of you.